A premonition saved me from a fatal crash 40 years ago. Today, my sister says I made it all up, but she never suspected I'd find the old letters that would expose her own dark secret. Be sure to subscribe, because this story of survival and betrayal has a twist you won't see coming. The air in my study always hangs thick with the scent of old paper and lemon polish, a smell I've come to associate with peace. But not tonight. Tonight, the air itself felt heavy, charged with 40 years of memories. 40 years. It's a lifetime. Long enough for a newborn to have children of their own. Long enough for cities to change their skylines and for the sharp edges of grief to soften into a dull, persistent ache. On the large oak desk before me, 12 faces stared back from an assortment of faded photographs. There was young Mr. Abernathy, the high school history teacher, with his goofy, lopsided grin, and the Miller sisters, barely out of their teens, their arms linked, both wearing matching floral dresses for their big European adventure. I treated each photo like a sacred relic, carefully placing it in a simple silver frame. This wasn't a morbid obsession, as some might think. It was a debt, a quiet, solemn tribute to the 12 souls who boarded the cross-country bus for Flight 212 to New York City on a rainy July night in 1985 and never made it home. A bus I was supposed to be on. If it weren't for that night, my own smiling 25-year-old face would just be another ghost on the mantelpiece. The memory is as vivid now as it was then. My tiny apartment, the scent of rain on hot asphalt wafting through the open window. My single suitcase was packed and waiting by the door, a sticker for Warsaw plastered crookedly on its side. I was leaving for a new life with my boyfriend Mark, who had already found a job and a small flat for us. I was buzzing with a nervous energy, a cocktail of fear and exhilarating freedom. I had spent the last hour on the phone with my family, my younger sister's Brenda's voice a sharp, envious note in the chorus of well wishes. Then, as I was doing a final check of my ticket, it hit me. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical sensation, a sudden ice-cold dread that settled deep in my gut. The air in the room seemed to thin, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Every nerve ending in my body screamed one clear, irrational command: do not get on that bus. I tried to shake it off. I paced the small apartment, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You're being ridiculous, Eleanor. It's just nerves." But the feeling wouldn't leave. It was a primal, unshakable certainty. With trembling hands, I unlocked my suitcase and began to unpack, each folded shirt feeling like a surrender to madness. I called the bus station, my voice shaky as I canceled my ticket, the operator on the other end audibly annoyed. I felt like a fool. A crazy, superstitious fool who had just thrown away her future because of a bad feeling. The doorbell jolted me back to the present. I glanced at the clock, nearly 7. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping a stray tear from my cheek, I went to answer it. It was Brenda. Of course. She stood on my porch, perfectly coiffed and dressed in an expensive-looking pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She held a casserole dish, a peace offering that, with Brenda, was never peaceful. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, breezing past me into the house, her eyes immediately scanning the room with the efficiency of a detective. "Thought I'd drop this off. Since you're probably too busy with your project to cook." Her gaze landed on the desk, on the 12 silver frames gleaming in the lamplight. A slow, condescending smile spread across her face. "Ah," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. The annual shrine. 40 years, Eleanor. Don't you think it's time to let it go? I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. It's not a shrine, Brenda. It's a memorial. I'm taking these to the community hall tomorrow for the service. Service? She laughed out a short, sharp laugh. You make it sound like you were there. You weren't even on the bus. You got lucky. The way she said lucky made it sound like an accusation, as if I'd somehow cheated my way out of a fate I deserved. I know I wasn't on the bus, I said, my voice quiet but firm. That's the entire point. I'm grateful for the life I got to live. This is my way of honoring the ones who didn't. She walked closer, picking up the photo of the Miller sisters. She studied it for a moment before placing it back down, her movements dismissive. Honestly, Eleanor, it's always been your best story, hasn't it? The girl who had a feeling. It's all very dramatic, but some people might say it's just a way to make someone else's tragedy all about you. And there it was, the glint of steel beneath the silk, the casual, cruel slash meant to cut me to the bone. She wasn't just being cynical, she was trying to poison the most profound moment of my existence, to rewrite my history as a pathetic play for attention. The casserole dish sat on my kitchen counter, a monument to her passive aggression. I watched her from the window as she got back into her sleek foreign car, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. It felt terrifyingly similar to the feeling I'd had 40 years ago, a silent alarm ringing in my soul. I didn't know it then, but this was more than just another one of Brenda's casual cruelties. This was a declaration of war, and what she was about to do next would prove that some wounds, even after 40 years, can be ripped open all over again. The morning after Brenda's visit, I tried to shake off her words like a dog shaking off water. I told myself it was just Brenda being Brenda, a creature so steeped in her own dissatisfactions that she had to spill them onto everyone else. I refused to let her tarnish the memorial. I spent the morning on the phone, coordinating with the community hall manager and confirming the small catering order. I was determined to make it a respectful, beautiful tribute. The first crack in my resolve appeared during a call with our cousin, Martha. Martha and I had always been close, more like sisters than my own sister and I ever were. But when I asked her if she and her husband Tom would be able to attend the service, there was a strange, telling hesitation on the line. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice unusually flat. "I'm not sure. Tom has that thing with his back, you know. We'll see." It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. There was a new distance in her voice, a cool reserve I'd never heard before. I hung up the phone with a sense of unease, a small, cold stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. The stone grew heavier that afternoon. I was at the grocery store, picking up some flowers for the service, when I ran into Carol Ann Gable, a woman my mother had played bridge with for 30 years. She was normally a warm, effusive person, all hugs and loud questions about my garden. Today she saw me. Her smile faltered for a split second, and then she steered her cart towards the dairy aisle with a sudden, intense interest in yogurt. She gave me a tight little wave over her shoulder, a gesture so dismissive it was a slap in the face. I stood in the middle of the aisle, my hand hovering over a bundle of white lilies, feeling like I had suddenly become invisible, or worse, someone to be actively avoided. The final, crushing blow came that evening. It was a call from my older brother, David. David, the eternal peacekeeper, the man who would rather walk over hot coals than get involved in a family dispute. His voice was thick with discomfort. Ellie, I have to ask you something, and I don't want you to get mad." "What is it, David?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. He took a deep breath. "Brenda's been talking to people. She's been saying, well, She's telling everyone that you invented the premonition story, that you were just a scared kid who got cold feet about moving to Poland, and when you heard about the crash a few days later, you embellished things to make it sound more special. He trailed off, the silence on the line thick with his own shame for even repeating the words. I sank into a kitchen chair, the world tilting slightly. It was one thing for Brenda to spit her venom at me in private. It was another thing entirely for her to meticulously dismantle my truth, piece by piece, behind my back. She was painting me as a liar, a pathetic opportunist who had built her entire identity on a lie she'd constructed from the wreckage of a tragedy. The injustice of it was staggering. It wasn't just an insult, it was an assassination of my character, my history, my very soul. The gratitude I'd felt every single day for 40 years, the quiet, solemn weight of my survival, she had twisted it into a cheap theatrical performance. And my family, the people who were supposed to be my harbor, were letting her do it. They were listening. They were doubting me. Later that night, I sat alone in my study, the 12 silver frames gleaming softly in the dark. I looked at their faces, frozen in time. Young Mr. Abernathy, the Miller sisters. They couldn't speak for themselves. And in that moment, my grief and my pain began to burn away, forged into something hard and sharp, resolve. This was no longer about my wounded pride. Brenda wasn't just attacking me, she was desecrating their memory, using their deaths as a tool to settle a 40-year-old score. My sister had turned my life's foundation into a lie. I was alone, and they all doubted me. I knew then that I had to find something, some tangible proof from 40 years ago, or her poisonous version of the story would become the only one ever told, and I would not let that happen. My quiet tribute was about to become a fight for the truth. Proof. The word echoed in the silent house. In a world poisoned by Brenda's whispers, my memory, my word, was no longer enough. I needed something solid, something tangible, something that couldn't be twisted or dismissed. And I knew, with a sudden, desperate clarity, where I might find it. The attic. A place I hadn't ventured into for years. It was the dusty museum of my former life, filled with boxes I hadn't had the heart to throw away. Somewhere in that chaotic archive, I knew there was a box labeled University and Beyond. And in that box, I prayed, was the one thing that could prove my story. The letters from Mark. Mark was my boyfriend back then, the man I was supposed to meet in Poland. He was the reason for the trip, the anchor of my new life. When I made the frantic decision not to go, I poured all my confusion and fear into a long, rambling letter to him. I wrote about the suffocating dread, the inexplicable certainty that I couldn't get on that bus. I posted it the very next morning, a full day before the news of the crash hit the papers. If I to find his reply, a letter where he mentioned my strange premonition before the world knew, it would be undeniable proof. The pull-down ladder for the attic groaned in protest as I lowered it, sending a small shower of dust and dead insects onto the hallway carpet. Armed with a flashlight, I ascended into the hot, stuffy darkness. The air was thick with the smell of aging wood, brittle paper, and mothballs, the scent of time itself. Beams of sunlight cut through the grime on the single round window, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny dancing spirits. It was all here, my entire life, packed away in cardboard tombs. There was the box with my high school yearbooks, another filled with my mother's old china. I ran my hand over a trunk containing my wedding dress, a garment I wore to marry a wonderful man I never would have met if I had boarded that bus. The irony was a bitter pill. I finally found it in the far corner, tucked behind a ridiculously large floor lamp from the 70s.
The box was sealed with yellowed tape and my own youthful handwriting scrawled across the side, University and Beyond. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like I was about to perform an archaeological dig on my own soul. I sliced the tape with a pocket knife and lifted the flaps. The top layer was a jumble of memories. A faded university sweatshirt, a dog-eared copy of The Great Gatsby, a photo of a much younger me, arm in arm with Mark, both of us squinting in the sun, blissfully unaware of the separate paths our lives would take. A pang of old sadness hit me, a ghost of a life I never lived. I pushed the memorabilia aside, my fingers digging deeper. My hands brushed against a bundle of envelopes. I pulled them out. They were tied with a faded blue ribbon. I recognized Mark's bold, slanted handwriting instantly. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The entire history of our long-distance love affair right here in my hands. But as I held the bundle, another, smaller stack of letters tucked away at the bottom of the box caught my eye. These were different. The envelopes were a crisp, clean white, and they weren't addressed to me. They were written in a familiar, looping script that made my blood run cold. It was Brenda's handwriting, and they were addressed to Mark. Time seemed to stop. I stared at the 2 stacks of letters in my hands, the dust motes dancing in the slanted light of the attic. One bundle represented my desperate hope for vindication. The other was a complete mystery, an anomaly that had no place in my history. Brenda and Mark? They barely knew each other. Why would she be writing to him? And why were her letters here hidden away with mine? A cold dread, different from the one 40 years ago, but just as potent, washed over me. The proof I was looking for could wait. I had to solve this new, sickening puzzle first. My hands trembled as I slid one of Brenda's letters from its envelope. The date on it was from 3 months before my planned departure. "Dear Mark," it began, her handwriting a perfect, almost unnervingly cheerful loop. "I hope you don't mind me writing. Eleanor talks about you constantly, and I just feel like I know you. I worry about her, you know. She has so many grand ideas, but she can be so flighty. Sometimes I think she lives more in her dreams than in the real world. You seem so grounded. I hope you can be a good influence on her." I felt a wave of nausea. I read another, and then another. It was a pattern of subtle, insidious poison. In each letter, she presented herself as the concerned, stable older sister, while painting me as a chaotic, unreliable dreamer. She was undermining me, positioning herself as the voice of reason to a man she'd never even met, a man who loved me. It was a betrayal so calculated, so profoundly treacherous, that I struggled to breathe. The final letter in her stack was dated just 1 week before my scheduled trip. "I just hope she goes through with it, Mark. For your sake. She was talking yesterday about a strange feeling she had. You know how dramatic she can be. Please don't be too disappointed if she backs out at the last minute. Her heart is in the right place, but her head is always in the clouds." My God, she had been setting the stage for my failure from the beginning. She had planted the seed of my unreliability in Mark's mind long before I ever felt that wave of dread. She hadn't just twisted my story after the fact. She had tried to script it beforehand. Sickened, my hands shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in decades, I turned to the other bundle of letters. My letters. Mark's replies. I tore through them, searching for the one that mattered. And then I found it. The envelope was postmarked from Poland, dated July 29th, 1985. 2 days after the crash, but likely written before the news had reached him there. "Eleanor," I read, my eyes flying across his familiar script. "I have to be honest, your last letter left me confused and angry. To cancel everything, your whole future, our future, because of some terrible cold feeling? To say you just knew you couldn't get on that bus? It sounded like madness. I was heartbroken. I thought you were just making up an excuse to leave me. The letter went on, but I had found it. The proof. Written in his own hand, my premonition, my reason, recorded before he or anyone else knew its significance. I had found my vindication, but sitting there, on the dusty floor of my attic, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, I felt no triumph. In one hand, I held the truth that could silence the whispers and restore my name. In the other, I held a truth far uglier. Evidence of a secret 40-year war my own sister had been waging against me. Brenda hadn't just doubted my story. She had actively tried to sabotage my life and my love. And I realized the confrontation I was heading towards wasn't going to be about a bus crash anymore. It was going to be about a lifetime of lies. The memorial service was in less than 24 hours, and the choice I had to make could either shatter what was left of my family or, just maybe, lance the wound that had been festering in the dark for 40 decades. The memorial service was scheduled for 3 o'clock. At my brother David's insistence, the family gathered at his house for lunch beforehand. He called it a show of family unity, but the air in his perfectly manicured dining room was so thick with tension you could have cut it with a butter knife. I sat silently, a polite smile fixed on my face, feeling the weight of the 2 letters in my purse like stones. Brenda, on the other hand, was holding court at the head of the table, animated and laughing, soaking in the attention. She was the picture of confidence, a queen in her castle, blissfully unaware that the castle walls were about to come tumbling down. She had successfully created her narrative. In the eyes of my family, I was the slightly unstable, overly dramatic sister, and she was the patient, long-suffering one who had to put up with my eccentricities. The polite, strained conversations and the way everyone avoided my gaze confirmed it. They had chosen their side. The final straw came with the dessert. David's wife, Karen, brought out a lemon meringue pie, and Brenda clinked her fork against her water glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a little toast," she said, her voice smooth as cream. She raised her glass, her eyes sweeping over the family before landing on me with a look of manufactured pity. "To family, for being there for each other, for helping us see the truth, and for having the grace to move on from things that should have been left in the past." The implicit barb was meant for me, a final public dismissal of my memorial and my truth. Several family members nodded in agreement, shifting uncomfortably. That was it. The moment had arrived. I waited for the murmurs to die down. Then, I slowly and deliberately placed my napkin on the table and stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The simple act of standing was enough to make the room fall silent. "Thank you, Brenda. That's a lovely sentiment. And speaking of truth, I'd like to clear up a bit of a historical matter before we all move on." I let my gaze drift from my brother to my cousin Martha, to my Aunt Carol Ann. I am aware that a story has been circulating that I was not entirely truthful about my reasons for canceling my trip to Poland 40 years ago. A story that paints me as a liar who exploited a tragedy for attention. The color drained from David's face. Martha suddenly found the pattern on her plate fascinating. I have always been content to let my memory of that night be my own. But when my integrity is questioned by my own family, I feel I must respond. I reached into my purse and pulled out the first letter, the paper worn and soft with age. This is a letter from Mark, dated July 29th, 1985. He received my letter before the news of the crash had reached him in Poland. I unfolded it and read clearly into the suffocating silence. "Eleanor, I have to be honest. Your last letter left me confused and angry. To cancel everything because of some terrible cold feeling, to say you just knew you couldn't get on that bus. It sounded like madness. I stopped reading and looked up. The silence in the room was now heavy with shame. My brother couldn't look at me. Brenda, however, rallied with a short, brittle laugh. Oh, for heaven's sake, Eleanor. You're reading 40-year-old letters from a jilted boyfriend? This is desperate, even for you. That proves nothing. Perhaps, I said, my gaze locking onto hers. It's hard to know who to believe after so much time has passed, which is why I'm so very grateful that I also found this. I pulled out the second letter. Brenda's confident smirk faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This one is also dated from 1985, but it's from a week before my trip, and it's not addressed to me. It's addressed to Mark. I watched as understanding and then pure, stark terror dawned on my sister's face. I didn't read the whole thing. I didn't need to. I just read the most poisonous part. I just hope she goes through with it, Mark. For your sake. She was talking yesterday about a strange feeling she had. You know how dramatic she can be. Please don't be too disappointed if she backs out. I placed the letter on the table. The silence that followed was absolute. It was no longer the silence of shame, but of shock. Everyone stared at Brenda, whose face had crumpled. The mask of the sophisticated, witty sister had been utterly shattered, revealing the bitter, scheming woman beneath. The entire 40-year history of our family dynamic was being rewritten in the stunned minds of everyone present. The truth was finally out, shimmering in the air like heat haze. But seeing the mask fall from my sister's face, seeing her so completely and utterly exposed, didn't bring me the joy of victory. It brought only a deep, aching sorrow. The battle was over, but now I had to face the hardest part, standing in the wreckage and figuring out how to live with what was left. No one moved. The damning words from Brenda's letter hung in the air over the sad, half-eaten lemon meringue pie. My sister's face, which had been a mask of smug confidence just moments before, had completely crumbled. It was a ruin of shock, humiliation, and pure, unadulterated fury. Without a single word, she pushed her chair back so violently it nearly tipped over, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the house, the slam of the front door echoing like a gunshot. The silence she left behind was somehow louder. My family, who had been so quick to believe her whispers, now sat in the rubble of her deception, their eyes darting from me to the empty chair she'd just vacated. It was my brother, David, who finally broke the spell. Ellie, he stammered, his voice thick with shame so profound he couldn't meet my eyes. My God, I am so sorry. I just nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. I didn't have the energy for anger or for "I told you so." The victory, if you could call it that, felt ashes in my mouth. I had won the battle for the truth, but the cost was the final, complete severing of a relationship that had likely been dead for decades anyway. I mumbled my excuses and left, the 2 letters heavy in my purse, feeling more alone than ever. By the time I arrived at the community hall, a quiet resolve had settled over me. The small, rented room was simply decorated. On a long table at the front, the 12 silver frames I had so lovingly polished gleamed under the soft lights. About 30 people were scattered in the folding chairs. A few old neighbors, some distant relatives of the victims, and, to my surprise, David and his wife Karen. They sat near the back, their presence a silent, solid offering of support. Brenda, of course, was not there. The organizer, a kind woman from the Historical Society, invited me to the podium to say a few words. I walked up, my prepared speech clutched in my hand. It was a simple, heartfelt tribute to the 12 who had died. But as I stood there, looking out at the small, solemn gathering, I knew it wasn't the speech I needed to give. I set the paper aside. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. 40 years ago, I was given a gift. A terrible, beautiful, and heavy gift. The gift of a life that 12 other people with their own hopes and dreams, were denied. I've spent a lot of that time thinking about what you're supposed to do with a gift like that. I paused, my gaze drifting to the photos. I think when you're given a second chance, you face a choice. You can spend your life looking backwards, consumed with the why me, or you can look forward and try to answer the what now. And what I've learned, I continued, feeling a profound sense of clarity, is that the greatest disrespect to those who are gone is to waste the time you've been given, to live a life shrunken by bitterness or jealousy or resentment is its own kind of death. It's a prison you build for yourself brick by brick with every comparison, every grievance. It honors no one, least of all the memory of those you claim to miss. I wasn't looking at anyone in particular, but I felt David's eyes on me. I knew he understood. My promise all those years ago, to myself and to whatever force in the universe kept me off that bus, was simple: to live a life that was honest, to be grateful, and to be free from the poisons that can curdle a human heart. This memorial isn't just about remembering the dead. It's about reaffirming a commitment to the living. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment before a soft, warm applause filled the space. Later, as people mingled, David came up to me. He didn't say much. He just enveloped me in a hug, the first real hug he'd given me in years. "I'm so proud of you, Ellie. I'm so sorry." "I know." And I did. Walking out of the hall into the late afternoon sun, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had shattered a lie. The victory wasn't in exposing Brenda, but in freeing myself from the need for anyone else's validation. The ghosts of that night were finally at peace, and so was I.